because we're affected by them. Do a little exercise. Have you seen this? Okay. Draw 9 dots on a piece of paper in front of you. Just like that. Connect the dots using 4 lines. Don't lift your writing device off the paper. That's the only instruction. I will give you because this is television and it's a class, I'm only going to give you a minute because we can't necessarily have dead air. Starting now. So connect the dots with 4 lines, only 4 lines, and don't lift off the paper. You're going to have to think about this before you execute. Now, in a sense, I gave you a hint last week when I talked about media advocacy and shifting the frame on immigration, for example. Like in the context of crash, 5 seconds. In the context of crash, I already told you, this came out of racism studies, which you probably never heard until this class, that there were. Or sexism studies, even though you know that there's been a women's movement since the 70s, if not earlier. All right? Anybody find a way to do it? Yeah? Let's see. Okay. One of those does look like the solution. Okay. Anyone else? So here's the preferred solution. Now notice I did not say you had to stay within the box. Okay? I did not, you cannot solve this staying inside the box. Larger point, the reason we developed crash is, wait, Western society wants us to stay within the box and think of all the solutions that Western society gives us. Like, no, we can't solve this staying within your box. That ain't working. So we go outside of the box. Well, y'all crazy. Okay, you can think that, but it works for us. Okay? So the solution is outside of the box. However they define the box. That's why with media advocacy, we go outside the box. We shift the frame. Wait, if illegal immigration is about you breaking the law, oh, they're lawbreakers. Yeah, okay. Some lawbreakers you let break the law, like Arnold, like light-skinned Cubans, like Russians who kill black people, black doctors in white areas. Corporations. Why those people get exceptions? In whose national security interest is that? You already letting certain people break the law. Why is that? So we just shifted the question, right? Shifted the box. Oh, the problem ain't Mexicans. I'm sorry. I'm going to say something controversial. More controversial. I've done farm work for a day. I have never met, white folks keep talking about the lazy Mexican. I have never met the lazy Mexican. Who is this lazy Mexican white folks are talking about?
They're all drug dealers too, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. You know, I asked my Latino friend, have you met the lazy Mexican that white folks are talking about? Because I ain't never met one.
I've seen a few, but that's...
They tend to be rich.
For the most part.
But yeah, anyway. The lazy Mexican, no, not doing farm work.
Hardest working people I've ever seen.
Yeah. I mean, even Republican Gordon Smith, former senator from Oregon, basically says, I cannot have white people work in my fields because they don't work fast enough.
You should see them plant trees. It's amazing. You can't.
Lots of them. So, the solution is outside of the box. So, squares only see what's in the box. So, in jazz terms, the square is someone who is not hip. A hipster knows what's up. What is the hidden history, the real deal, on the down low, the QT, the word on the street? Right? What's outside the box? So squares can't necessarily see the hypercube. They can't see beyond the printed page to the backstory. So when I talk about algebra being a civil rights issue, you can't think on a higher plane, you cannot be free because you cannot conceive of what freedom is. Because if freedom is defined inside the box and where you want to be is outside of the box, you can't rely on the box to teach you how to operate outside of the box. So remember Bob Moses, algebra, civil rights issue. Well, I thought it was just math computation. Nope. Outside of the box. So the box is inside. Inside the box is what they want you to know, but there's always a dimension beyond that. In literal terms. That's a 4-dimensional hypercube. That's a 6-dimensional hypercube. So one of the things you can do is train yourself to see, one, the square, just the square, on that 4-dimensional hypercube. On every square, there is an invisible hypercube on both sides of every square of that. Now, you can train yourself just to see the 4-dimensional hypercube and the 6-dimensional hypercube. Can be done. It's tricky, but it can be done. People are always criticizing, well, I'm often getting criticized because, oh, you go off topic. No, there's actually a connection to what I'm saying. I can draw you a line. I could. Looks confusing. Just a higher dimension. You could just focus on the squares in that, but why would you want to? The issue is complicated enough. So crash is like this, right? So 10-dimensional hypercube, that gives you all the many a visual representations of all the different complications that you could have just within crash, just looking at the 6 isms, each one of which exists under each of those categories. So, for example, I talk about, and one of the things you saw last week, we're talking about Indigenous Christianity, remember that? Okay? That's the Archangel Gabriel. It's from an Ethiopian website. Now, Ethiopians still, especially where they're not colonized, still have African images of Christian figures. And this is an Ethiopian version of the Archangel Gabriel. So when I talk about, all right, if I am an African indigenous Christian, now I was raised on the King James Version of the Bible, Southern Baptist, which definitely did not have African images in it. But I was raised by a significant role model to think of that and those images and think and start seeking those images out. So why Gabriel? So the Annunciation of the Incarnation. The Archangel Gabriel is the person in the Bible that basically told Mary, you pregnant with the Messiah. It's Archangel Gabriel that did that. It is also the Archangel Gabriel that dictated the Quran to Muhammad. Right? Just saying. Coincidence? dictation of the Quran, enunciation of the Incarnation, plus, Gabriel also could have a feminine aspect because technically angels are neutral for gender, neutral for race. They're supposed to be beyond that, but how humans depict them. So why I'm bringing this up in terms of looking outside the box, right? There's a backstory, all right? So Gabriel is the angel that interpreted Daniel's dream, and Daniel dreamt of the Messiah's arrival in Jerusalem, Jerusalem, or Salam, which means the city of peace. Isn't that the height of irony? All right, so education produces a mindset. How well do you deal with and utilize diversity? Is it a problem or is it an opportunity? So Crash begins to get, let's start with the barriers first, and in order to get past the barriers, you have to know the strengths. How do you become powerful in different atmospheres of power? How do you build a country with new immigrants? Like where you want them to come, instead of considering them a problem. How do you do that? Okay? It's not just that they learn to speak English, it's also learning what they have to teach us that is beyond words contained within English, which can't be said in English. Okay? Thinking outside of that box. Okay? Get your funky mojo working. Boogie. Ashe. So, psychology. So, Western psychology, as we've seen by definition, Western, as we've seen by definition, means white, according to the dictionary. The invisible defining quote-unquote norm by which all else is measured. So, in our African American truth-telling, we are often characterized as paranoid. We are. You people are always suspicious. It's a microaggression. You should be colorblind. Another microaggression. Always seeing issues in terms of race and racism. Okay, well, we can actually go beyond race and racism, but you have to be cognizant of the largest, most frequent type of wounding you have that targets you. What's the most salient characteristic you could see about me from a distance of 50 feet? You can't hear me. And as it was said at the top of the broadcast, I was living in 80-degree heat for a week. So, yeah, I'm darker. That's a good thing. There's a normative psychology that is non-Western. Okay? So, in plainer English, there are other ways of defining normal than white ways. There are. So, the doctrine of, or myth, of white supremacy depends on the belief that whites are superior to all races. Has to ignore the genetic fact that humans arose from common ancestors in Africa. Has to ignore that or explain that away. Okay, so not only does it ignore inconvenient scientific facts, but it also hides, distorts, or fabricates truth to dispute the reality we're the same people. Why would it do that? Right? So, psychology is the science which, in Western psychology, which studies the mind. So Western psychology is often influenced by the doctrine of white supremacy, and that's part of why Western psychology ignores essentially issues of race. Because the original, well, we'll be seeing that, right? So talking about myths, theory, and doctrine. So myth is a traditional story about heroes or supernatural beings, often explaining the origin of natural phenomena or aspects of human behavior. Myths considered as a group or type of story, a character, story, theme, or object that embodies a particular idea or aspect of culture, somebody or something whose existence is or was widely believed in, but who is fictitious. Like the flat earth. That was popular in Europe, but not in Africa. Not in China either. Why? Because Africans and Chinese had sailed the globe and knew that it was circular. It was a sphere, not flat. Europeans had not done that. A story that has a hidden meaning, especially one that is meant to teach a lesson. Another example. So, theory. The body of rules, ideas, principles, and technique that apply to a particular subject, especially when seen as distinct from actual practice. Abstract thought or contemplation, an idea or belief about something arrived at through speculation or conjecture, set of circumstances or principles that is hypothetical, set of facts, propositions, or principles analyzed in relation to one another and used, especially in science, to explain phenomena. So theory, the theory of evolution basically explains certain facts with a particular worldview. So when it was proposed, when I did a workshop about African psychology, or African-centered reality therapy, and I said, okay, if we look at African points of view of Christianity, Africans don't believe the world started 5,000 years ago. Sorry, they don't. The pyramids are older than that. So where did this belief come among Europeans studying the King James Version of the Bible and biblical scholars saying the world started in 404 BC? No. We ain't buying that. All right? So if African Christians don't believe that, and Western scientists are saying, okay, it's 15 billion years old, let's go with that. It's definitely older than 4,000 BC, 6,000 years. Definitely. Let's go with that. That's easy, right? And then when you fit evolution in a longer time frame, that actually starts to work. Now, does that mean God doesn't exist? No, that's a separate proposition. Don't even think about that. Well, you can. Right? So, when we talk about myths, theories, and then doctrine. So, when we talk about, especially this line, distinct from actual practice, when I talk about that word praxis, right? Praxis is the intersection of theory and practice, where they modify each other. Well, I have an idea how this works. Well, let's see if your idea works. Oh, that didn't work. Well, let's change do we change the theory to fit the practice? Well, you might. Oh, people come from a criminal culture, and that culture is the same as their ethnicity. So therefore, the solution is we lock them up, or we kill them, or we keep them from immigrating. How's that working for you? Not so much? How do we look? Maybe people have needs that are not being met, and you're discriminating against them.
That's why disproportionate people in prison.
Yeah, sure. Oh, black people come from a criminal culture, so that's why they commit crimes. Huh, okay. Really? That's your theory? Doctrine. A rule or principle that forms the basis of a belief, theory, or policy. Notice that word policy. All right, so we know with the war on drugs, most people that are using illegal drugs are not the ones filling the jails. But we're not arresting the people that are using the drugs. Drug use is illegal, and why arrest just the drug sellers? Why not the drug users? 2, a body of ideas, particularly in religion, taught to people as truthful or correct. So when we talk about, certain Christian theme parks basically putting humans side by side with dinosaurs, this ain't the Flintstones. The facts do not support that. Otherwise, we'd have to revise our whole theory. Humans riding dinosaurs? No. That ain't gonna work. Okay, something taught to people is doctrine, archaic. This is usually when the church ran the school system. So the doctrine of white supremacy is based on the three races theory, which is itself based on a version of a Bible, pretty close to King James Version of the Bible, if not King James Version itself. Right? White supremacy rests on a white Jesus. It does. It falls apart without it. They had to have the Caucasoid race being the superior race, and other races devolving from that, Mongoloid and Negroid. Had to have that to support white supremacy, and that's biblically based, according to the Germans that developed it. The first places that the Bible was printed, Gutenberg Bible, it's in Germany. So seeing how all that ties together, right? So when we look at evolution and origin, so there's a picture, let's see if I can find it. That picture that is being referred to, and I'll move it up. I got this, the power of naming and defining. So I got this from a Christian website after Googling on Homo erectus. So tell me about this picture. What do you see?
The color is shifting.
The color is shifting, right.
Walking upright.
Yeah, walking upright.
I can see only one thing down below, that's a monkey.
Huh? Yeah.
I can see only one thing down below, that's a monkey.
Well, the visual grammar of the picture is that on the left side is the lowest form of evolution, and on the right side is the highest form of evolution. And if we look at, there is, no, like Homo sapiens from Africa are not going to be colored at the extreme right there. They're not. So why there? Why is that? So one assumption of the picture is who is the pinnacle of evolution and who's left out of evolution. Now, white folks, that is scientific white folks, with their emphasis on physical evidence, mitochondrial DNA, insist humans evolved in Africa, migrated to Australia via India, and from India up into the rest of Asia, Europe, and then here. That's the current theory tracked by mitochondrial DNA. Physical evidence, independent of the Bible, right? So the Aborigines and also the natives, of course, say they didn't come from Africa and they didn't come over on no land bridge. They were always here. All right, they're part of their spirituality. I'm not going to dispute that. Scientific evidence doesn't back that up, but fine, whatever. Okay, scientific evidence as well as common sense would indicate that it should be dark-skinned Africans on the right side of the picture, not white people. But it's not. After all, it is Africa we're talking about. Garden of Eden, according to Genesis, is in Africa. So when we talked about last week, Kawaida theory, okay? A theory isn't just a thought-up explanation. It's an explanation based on repeatable, observed facts and reality, confirmed by others in your community as a reality. So when I'm talking about Kawaida theory or intersectionality isn't covered in Western psychology because they don't think of psychology as a discrimination, because they're not discriminated against. They wouldn't think about it. It's not inside their box. There was a quote, "You may pray about your loved ones on the Gulf Coast," this is during Katrina, "but you use your cell phone to call them." Praying is about religious or spiritual faith. Prayer works along the lines that prayer works along the lines. A cell phone is based on the scientific fact of electromagnetism. Its workings are not a matter of faith, but proven scientific theories. Now, Jim Gates is a black quantum physicist who spoke at the U of O in 2005, after Katrina happened. This is a book, the cover of which, God's Secretaries by Adam Nicholson, The Making of the King James Version of the Bible. The reason I use it here is, if you look at the demographic of the scholars that King James used to put together the King James Version of the Bible, you notice their racial demographic. Really? You couldn't find any black biblical scholars in Europe in the 1600s? Really? Huh. Okay. I'm just saying. So, part of the foundations of whiteness. Okay? You start with a mandate from God, and it helps if you help God write or edit the mandate. So 1550, King James version of the Bible. He gathers 12 white scholars who leave out about 200 books, especially those with African reference. Changes biblical references to, for example, from tyrants to the more neutral kings. They use Hebrew, Greek, Latin, but not Aramaic. The religious authorities and secular authorities enforce God's will on earth through the divine right of kings. So remember, when he's creating this Bible, it is actually illegal for common people who are not taught to read anyway in England to even read the Bible. You would actually be executed for attempting to read the Bible. So if the king is creating a Bible for the common people to read, you think it's for spreading the good news or a means of social control? Is that a conspiracy theory to even ask that question? Just wondering.
Obvious conclusion.
At this time, Christian supremacy, Christian means white. They start talking in terms of blood or racial purity. They talk about the superior civilizing influence of Western civilization, Occidental, that is Western versus Oriental, Eastern, bringing the light to the unwashed masses, though to be sure, at the time, frequent bathing is not generally a European custom during the time, was here.
Birth of imperialism.
So literacy is not widespread, and there's no system of free public education. So once you have religious and political authorities on the same page, explorers claim territory for the crown and church. This is where the doctrine of discovery comes from. That is, and basically any Christian, because this is at this time Christian means white only, any Christian who discovers lands that have not been claimed by any Christian can now claim all that land permanently, whether it's inhabited or not, for all of Christendom.
That's why the Spanish gained
Right.
immediate control, because they worked for the church.
And they actually divided the line. So the Spanish and the Portuguese divided up parts of North and Central America, the Dutch, et cetera, et cetera. The Russians discovered Alaska and then sold it to the Americans the next year, based on this principle, discovering it. Of course, the land was not uninhabited. All right? So, Johann Friedrich Blumenbach at Göttingen writes in 1770 of racial classifications: Caucasian, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid. George II of Hanover, George of the House of Hanover, imports that university's curriculum to England, and thence it comes to America in the education of the colonies. So that becomes the basic Columbus discovered America curriculum, Western civilization. Okay, so there are exceptional others in other races. They are exceptional not like others of their race because they are like us. Because they are like us, it proves our supremacy. So starting in 1619, Turtle Island, North America is populated by Indian nations, European colonists, European indentured servants, who are white and black, African slaves, Indian slaves, and so-called free Negroes, also known as Maroons. Indentured servants could be beaten and flogged by their masters as bad as slaves could be. Those servants, white, black, male, and female, as well as Indians, often found common cause and basically banded together against the wealthy white upper classes. So basically you had to fight against that. So white women and Africans would escape into Indian country. In Virginia, a series of laws was enacted which would later establish what we call today, whiteness, a series of interlocking and invisible privileges based on race, gender, and class, among other things. So when we talk about intersectionality, these systems of discrimination have very old roots in what's American culture, though it's not strictly American. So for example, 1640, 3 indentured servants in New Amsterdam, that's New York, 1 black, 2 white, they ran away from their master. Now, they're indentured servants, which means they were European citizens when they came here, when they immigrated here. And basically the price of their labor was paying off this debt.
14 years.
Yeah. So when they are caught and brought before the court adds a number of years to the white man's indenture and sentenced the black man's servitude for life. Okay? They came here under the same condition, but they were treated differently because of their race. Okay? The law never recognizes racial differences. There were no precedents. This starts the precedent of creating differences based on race. So you can actually, I can post this on the website if you want, but you can look it up by these characteristics. Nakayama and Krizek, Whiteness, a Strategic Rhetoric, in the Quarterly Journal of Speech in 1995. So this essay treats whiteness as a rhetorical place that has been rendered invisible by discourse. That is, by how we talk about it, what we say, and also what we don't say. The idea, so Nakayama and Krizek argue that the invisibility of whiteness has been strategically constructed by whites who want to maintain their position in the center. The invisible center which defines but remains itself undefined. So I can leave a full version on the website, or you can look it up, either way. It's interesting reading. So for example then, so let's look at the location of white supremacy. So they say it's the invisible defining center, Nakayama and Krizek. So if this were a ripple in a pond, you don't see where the original rock dropped. All you can see the ripples moving out, right? So the defining center. All right? So when people say, and this is again, because remember this is the Quarterly Journal of Speech, so they're studying language. So who defines the rules in the center, and who is marginalized? So when they talk about marginalizing, they're talking about people outside that margin. Okay? So then there's outside. So you have the center, you have the margin, and you have outside, which is basically invisible, because the people who are marginalized are still visible by the defining center. All right, the center defines but is unknown. So who is in the narrative discourse? That is what is known. Who is not in the discourse? And that is what is unknown. So when we talk about, for example, Columbus discovered America, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus is in the center, but the native people are marginalized. They actually, even their name is outside of the story. So Columbus and Taino, right? So when we saw, for example, in the illegal immigration debates a few years ago, people waving the Mexican flag and basically saying things like, the United States stole Mexico. That is also outside of the normal discourse of what's taught. Immigration policy, white supremacy. That's also outside of the discourse, usually. Feet wet, light-skinned Cubans, part of the narrative discourse, dark-skinned Cubans and Haitians, outside of the story, unknown. The roots of terrorism. Israel, US on one side, Arabs and Nazis on the other. Who does that narrative discourse?
Who's really got the weapons of mass destruction?
Who's really got the weapons of mass destruction? So when we talk about, now getting back to the subject matter of the course, again, this is all the subject matter, the invisible defining center. The World War II allies, the US, Britain, France, USSR, Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, China, Denmark, Greece, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, South Africa, Yugoslavia, and the World War II Axis, Germany, Italy, Japan, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and the Axis of evil recently, talking about in the 80s and 90s, Iraq, Iran, North Korea. Who's doing the defining? So for example, we talk about studying historical racism in its long and ugly history. In the United States, white racism has improvised 1,000 variations on two basic themes. One, black people are born with inferior brains and a limited capacity for growth. Two, their personality tends to be abnormal, whether by nature or by nurture. These concepts of inferiority and pathology are interrelated and reinforce each other. Both have served to sanctify a hierarchical social order in which the Negro's place, quote unquote, is forever ordained by his genes and the accumulated disabilities of his past. These are two black psychiatrists in a book, Racism and Psychiatry. The traditional corollary to the view, say the two, is that black people function best when they stay in their place, i.e., inferior to whites. Social tasks and privileges normal to white men are too stressful for the black man. Blacks living in unnatural freedom in the North were prone to insanity. Mental health was associated with contentment and with a subordinate place in society. Protest was a sign of derangement. Now, this is basically type 6. Sociostructural violence. Defining what's normal. Right? So in 42, tying that string together, Jackie Robinson should have been content to stay in the Negro Leagues. How dare you invade a white game? How dare you ensure competence? How dare you steal bases? So they walk him. He hits home runs. They walk him, they spike him, they do all kinds of things that you'll see in the movie if you see it, and I recommend that you do. But their whole worldview is, okay, there's 400 white men in a previously all-white sport and all of organized baseball at the time in the 40s. They integrated with one man.
Have you seen the original one that Jackie Robinson started with as himself?
Yeah.
That was a good movie. I just saw it.
Yeah, the Jackie Robinson story, right?
Yeah. He played himself. It was great.
So because you'll probably be more likely to see 42 than the Jackie Robinson story, but Branch Rickey, the owner of the Dodgers, is basically telling Jackie not to fight back at all, even in terms of physical assault. And you can kind of see the emotional and psychological toll this kind of takes on him, right? So it's still coming out of the view of protest would be a sign of derangement. Now this again is coming out of a view of Western psychology of black inferiority. Not just black inferiority, but also of white women being inferior as well. So that's why the crash analysis looks at, okay, who else gets treated like this? But we're just looking at racism because that's where a lot of the literature comes from. So Samuel Cartwright, a white Southern physician, coined maladies which affected runaway slaves. Now this is one of the fathers of contemporary Western psychology in America. Basically talking about slaves in the Civil War. He said, Drapetomania aegypticus, the flight from home madness, a mental illness caused by slaves that caused slaves to run away from slavery. In other words, you were mentally ill, you were crazy to try and escape slavery. Now, if this is one of the founders of Western psychology, you can understand why in the 21st century, if this is where they started in the 19th century, why in the 21st century, racism doesn't exist for them. This is where they start. We're crazy for wanting to be free. We're crazy for thinking we're equal. Okay. You're not crazy for thinking you're superior, but we're crazy for thinking we're equal. Okay. Diathesia Ethiopica, also known as rascality by overseers. Slaves destroyed property, avoided work, and raised disturbances with the overseers. So this again, this is on the book list of Racism and Psychiatry by Alexander Thomas and Samuel Silliman. So in the historical view of these scientists, blacks had smaller, less complex, and less evolved brains. You saw this in Django Unchained, okay, with his science of phrenology. One theory of racial superiority held that Caucasians or Caucasoids were the superior race that evolved after the biblical flood. Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid. Sir Robert Downes, Down syndrome, held that Mongolism, Mongoloid features in people with that form of mental retardation were evidence of the inferiority of Asian people, even though what he's describing is white people who've been born with fetal alcohol syndrome because their moms drank too much, because we didn't have a theory of alcoholism in the 19th century. So what Downs was seeing was white kids being born with that particular birth defect, which gave them one aspect of Asian features in their eyes and also limited mental capacity. And he's saying, well, this is the evidence of Asian superiority, or rather Asian inferiority, even though it's white people that he's observing. Like, well, how does that work with reality? So we call them developmentally disabled. So even those views were widely held and formed official policy well into the 20th century. So, health consequences of racism on African Americans, 300 years of slavery, followed by 100+ years of legally and socially reinforced apartheid, supported by acts of terrorism, which only ended legally a little over 40 years ago. Direct health consequences are tied to type 1, 2, and 3 forms of racism, overt and covert, individual and institutional. Disproportionate stress-related chronic diseases, tobacco and alcohol addiction, overeating, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer, in terms of dealing with the stress of racism. That's proven in the literature, the medical literature, not my opinion. Scientific fact. So, for example, black people are 13% of the population, or let's say 12. They smoke 35% of the cigarettes, because cigarettes are promoted as a stress reliever, and the cigarettes that are targeted to this particular market are the most addictive, i.e. menthol, with the highest forms of carcinogen.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
It is accurate.
Oh, still, yeah.
I was just curious.
Oh, still. And it's reinforced in prison, too. That's one of the indicators, you know. White convicts will not smoke, quote unquote, nigger cigarettes, and that's menthol. It's all been from, you know, tobacco marketing. You know, like Marlboro used to be a female cigarette. And they rebranded it, you know, for the Marlboro Man because it wasn't selling as a female cigarette. Okay? So, again, targeted marketing, this is sociostructural violence. Right? Normal, oh, it's not racism. It's just business. All right? So, that means because of that, just from tobacco alone, we're 55% more likely to develop cancer. And what we saw with Henrietta Lacks is when we develop cancer, we're probably not going to get early detection or prevention services. So let's see, got 5 minutes. So, your genetic products of human evolution. You have the wisdom of the ancestors in your genetic line, and potentially every human who ever lived, if you attune yourself correctly and accurately. So learning is a matter of exposure to unfamiliar things until they become familiar. So Western civilization, for example, you're learning your ABCs, print literacy, spelling, grammar, syntax, context, meaning, undertone, metaphor, simile, trope, composition, style, and argument, research. These are all things that you're supposed to learn in college, by college, going from elementary to college. So I'm talking about them. In terms of numeracy, 1, 2, 3, numeracy, times tables, fractions, algebra, order of operation, geometry, trigonometry, calculus. It's what Western civilization wants you to know, and then build on those basic building blocks. The arts, visual, musical, the classics, that means the European, Greek, and Roman classics. All this is in the box. Geography and history. So, the idea of a weapon of mass instruction is to counter the limited education in the box that you've received so far. So, the educational system is designed to stratify society by limiting or enhancing exposure to certain ideas. So part of that is expanding your vocabulary and your literacy. Okay, if you don't know about them and where they came from, they can't be significant to you. If they confine you to a ghetto, never think about the globe. So, we'll continue on Wednesday. Let's wrap it, Kareem.